Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's lesson. Today we'll be talking about suicide. So let's go ahead and get started. To start off our lesson today, I would really appreciate it if you guys would take the time to watch this video in full. So I really enjoy playing that video at the beginning of every class. The name of the song is actually the number for the suicide hotline. What I like about that video is you kind of get to see where the bullying started, where kind of his struggling with his life and things like that happened. And then you can see how it kind of plays out. I like how at the very end you can see the things that he was able to accomplish because he didn't make that decision. His dad was accepting of him. He was still with his significant other and all of those things. So I like to play that. After this song was released, the hotline actually received the second highest daily call volume. So basically that song helps to bring awareness of the suicide hotline and the fact that it's out there. And if you're struggling, you can call that hotline for help. What happens is you'll call that phone number and it's going to provide free, confidential, emotional support 24/7. So you're able to talk with them about what's going on in your life, why you're feeling the way you are. And it's kind of a confidential, safe space where they don't know who you are. What happens when you call is you'll get an automated message. The wait time is typically less than 1 minute, and then they'll answer with a greeting, kind of getting to know who you are and stuff. They're not going to automatically start asking you questions to kind of throw you off or anything like that. If you're not somebody that feels like when you're having trouble, you can talk on the phone about things because maybe you can't talk when you're about to cry or whatever the case may be, there's also a crisis text line. You can text hello to 741-741, and this is free 24/7 confidential help over text. A crisis doesn't just mean suicide. It is any emotion for which you need support. So maybe you're being bullied, stress in school, depression, anxiety, suicide, relationships. All of those things can be things that you can text about, and it kind of gives someone a trained counselor for support and information that way as well. So what is suicide exactly? Suicide is the act of intentionally taking one's life. It is, unfortunately, in today's society, the second leading cause of death of those aged 15 to 24. So it is happening more frequently, and it is a way that we lose a lot of students and kids in your age range. The question is, why do people make the decision to commit suicide? Like, what drives them to this point? Usually when we're in class, we will discuss this as a class. Obviously, there's a very amount of things that could happen, right? Maybe they're being bullied in school. Maybe they're having family problems at home. Maybe they were assaulted in some way. There are a lot of things that drive someone to the point of suicide. I think the biggest thing that is a common misunderstanding of people who are making the decision to commit suicide is that people think like that the people who are committing the action actually want to die. A lot of times what happens is people feel so alone, or they feel like what's happening in their life is not going to stop or ever going to end. They want that pain to end, and so that's why they make that decision to end their life, because they feel like there's no way out and there's no way that anything is going to change. Some warning signs that we should be aware of, especially with our friends and family of someone who could be contemplating suicide, are the following things. First thing, we want to think of the way that they're talking. A lot of people think that people who commit suicide aren't open about it, but a lot of times they are talking about wanting to die or kill themselves. A lot of times they'll be saying things like they feel hopeless or they have no purpose in life. They talk about being a burden to others and things like that. What is their mood like? A lot of times people who are contemplating suicide will have a loss of interest in hanging out with friends or doing activities. They'll have anxiety, depression, and they'll also have a little bit of irritability. Some behaviors that someone might do when considering suicide are the following. You might see that they will increase their use of alcohol and drug use. Maybe they're looking for a way to kill themselves. They're looking things up online. Maybe they're giving away possessions. So maybe they have something that's important to them, like a necklace or a blanket or whatever it is, and they're starting to hand those things away. And also if they're withdrawing from activities, which kind of ties into that mood above loss of interest, they're choosing to withdraw in activities and things like that. I want you to sit here for a second and I want you to think of what your life looked like 4 years ago. So for most of you, if you're sophomores, obviously that'll be about 4 years ago, sixth grade, something like that. I want you to think of who your friends were at that age, how you were feeling at that age. I feel like a lot of times we feel like we don't have a way out or like things in our life can't change, but they will change. If you think of just 4 years ago in sixth grade, how different your life was. It's incredible the amount of changes that can happen and the good that is to come. I wanted to go through some statistics on suicide because I find them pretty interesting. As a whole, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. So from what all the people in the United States are dying from, suicide is that 10th thing that people are dying from. There is one death by suicide every 12 minutes. So when you're sitting in a class period with me throughout the school day, there will be roughly 3 to 4 people in America who have committed suicide. For every one suicide, there are 25 people who attempted to commit suicide, attempted to end their life, but were not successful. So if you can think about those numbers and if all of those suicide attempts were successful, how many suicides and what the leading cause of death would be in the U.S., it's very scary to think that we're getting that close and that these numbers are kind of laying out the way that they are. I think that this statistic is kind of interesting. Male deaths represent 79% of all U.S. suicides. So of all the suicides in the United States that they're taking into account, males account for 79% of those. I feel like a lot of times when we think about suicide, we don't think about males as a primary person who is committing that, but that is what the statistics have shown. If you look at the statistic before, it says that male deaths represent 79% of all U.S. suicides, yet females attempt suicide 3 times as often as males. So females try to commit suicide 3 times as often, yet men are still obviously being successful at a higher rate. So why is that? We usually have this discussion in class, how the typical way that a female would necessarily commit suicide. A lot of times they'll take medication. There's some cutting that is associated, whereas males tend to commit suicide in a more demanding way, like gun use and things like that. So that puts them at a higher likelihood of success when obviously using those heavier types of weapons to commit suicide. So the question is, how can you help someone who is considering suicide? I'm sure that there's a lot of people that we know that have considered it at one time or another. That's why we need to be sure that we're looking out for those warning signs. But what can we do to help if somebody is considering it? The big thing is start by asking questions and speaking up to that person. Say things like, I have been feeling concerned about you lately. When did you begin feeling like this? Are you thinking about dying? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Have you thought about getting help? You could say something like, you may not feel it now, but how you are feeling will change. We talked about that 4-year difference and how things do get better. If you think that somebody is definitely at risk and needs extra support right away, get immediate help if necessary. Don't leave the person alone if you know they're feeling suicidal so that they have that window of time to commit the act. Be sure to tell a family member or a friend what is going on with that person. It's important that you're not holding all of the guilt if somebody does decide to follow through because you're trying to keep a secret. Call 911 or your local emergency number right away. A lot of times they might need to be hospitalized until the crisis has passed, because a lot of times we talked about how when we're feeling stressed, we aren't making rational decisions and we're overthinking and we're thinking that things are far worse than what they are. So a lot of times they'll need to be isolated for a short period of time until they can bring their mind back down to normal. Like I said, you don't want to feel guilty for not doing anything. Don't live with, well, what if I would have done this? Some other things you can do if you know your friend is feeling this way, you can encourage them to call a hotline. Gave you that crisis text line as well as the suicide hotline number. Sometimes they don't feel comfortable opening up to you, but they might feel comfortable opening up to someone else. Encourage them to seek treatment, whether they need anxiety or depression medication, they need to go to a doctor, they need to see a counselor, a therapist, whatever the case may be. It is not your job to substitute as a mental health provider. So when it's saying seek treatment, they shouldn't just be relying on their friends to help them get through it. It's important that they're getting that professional help. Encourage the person to communicate with you and be open and honest. So if they are feeling some way, then you can be aware of that. Be respectful, acknowledge the other person's feelings. Obviously, sometimes it is hard for us to wrap our brain around someone wanting to commit this action. However, we have to be open-minded and be respectful and be encouraging because we can't change the way that someone is thinking about it. Don't be patronizing or judgmental, kind of ties into be respectful. And then don't say things like things could be worse. You have a lot to live for. A lot of times whenever we're saying things like this, we're kind of diminishing the way that they're feeling instead of acknowledging that the way they're feeling is not okay with them mentally at that moment. If you know that your friend has any items that can help in facilitating suicide, it is very important that you remove those dangerous items from the home. You can see that never is on here really big. I highly suggest that you never, ever, ever promise to keep a secret if your friend tells you they're considering taking their own life. If you know that your friend is in a boat where they are going past a point where they need medical assistance so that you can make sure that they don't commit the act, make sure that you're getting them that professional help and telling the people you need to tell. You would rather tell someone than have to live with that and wondering what you could have done differently. I really enjoy playing this video. This is a story of a guy that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. He was attempting suicide and he survived, and I think he gives a good perspective on the situation.
We have lost far too many lives traveling the path to this day.
Since 1937, over 2,000 people have died at the Golden Gate Bridge. I feel lucky to be alive every single day. Of the thousands that have died off the Golden Gate Bridge, I am of the 1% who have survived. So I was born on drugs and premature. And then I bounced around from home to home. Nobody wanted to keep me because I was sick. And I got lucky. I landed in the home of Patrick and Deborah Hines. I had a great childhood. I thought growing up that everything's going to be great. And then at 17, it all came crashing down. If you can imagine feeling that everyone around you is out to get you, trying to hurt you, and trying to kill you, and you believe that to be the truth. From the extreme paranoia, I exhibited symptoms of mania. From the mania came the hallucinations, both auditory and visual. And so with that and the bipolar disorder, I just was spiraling out of control. I vividly remember writing my suicide note. And people don't get it. I thought I was a burden to everyone who loved me because that's what my brain told me, because that's how powerful your brain is. I got off the bus. I walked slowly down the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. People rode by me, drove by me, walked by me, and a woman approached me. And she said, "Will you take my picture?" She said, "Thanks," and she walked away. It was that moment I just said, nobody cares. The reality was that everybody cared. I just couldn't see it. I ran forward, and using my two hands, I catapulted myself into free fall. What I'm about to say is the exact same thing that 19 Golden Gate Bridge jump survivors have also said. The millisecond my hands left the rail, it was an instant regret. And I remember thinking, no one's going to know that I didn't want to die. In 4 seconds, I fell 75 miles an hour, 25 stories, and I hit the water. I was in the most physical pain I have ever experienced. The Coast Guard was amazing. He was just so freaked out that I was alive that he just dove in and brought me on board. The guy said, do you know how many people we pull out of this water that are already dead? And I said, no, and I don't want to know. The guy put his hand on my forehead and said, kid, you're a miracle. My father took one step into the hospital room, and I looked up at him and I said, Dad, I'm sorry. And he said, no, Kevin, I'm sorry. And if you think about it, both of our immediate reactions were guilt. Guilt that didn't belong to either of us. And even though I didn't die, I caused people a great deal of grief and pain. Just the day of my attempt still sits within them today. I asked my father if he still feared my death by suicide. He said every time the phone goes off, his first inclination is Kevin alive. I had that impact on my dad. So after the jump, the road to recovery was pretty long. I had 7 psych ward stays in the next 11 years. I still have all the symptoms I ever had. Mania, depression, psychosis, hallucinations, all that's still there. I just know how to cope with it and I know how to beat it. I built a support network over these years of treatment so that I wouldn't be fighting this alone. So it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay not to ask for someone to back you up. To the families who live with the loss or losses of loved ones, they didn't do that to hurt you or destroy your life. They took their lives because they were struggling and in a great deal of emotional and mental pain. Suicide, mental illness, and addiction are the only diseases that we blame the person for perpetually. But people die from suicide just like they die from any other organ diseased. Today, no matter the pain I'm in, no matter the struggles I experience, I do believe that life is the greatest gift we've ever been given. And if you're suffering mentally, don't wait like I did, sitting in denial for so long. Because recovery happens. Living proof.
I really enjoy Kevin's story, and I like showing that video in class as well, because I do think that it kind of shows you someone who was in a mental state where they felt like they couldn't go along any further, and they were fortunate enough to survive their attempt, and they can see all that had to come after considering that. One thing he said in his video that I really liked is he said, people die from suicide just like any other organ disease, right? We get cancer, we get whatever thing we have going on physically in our life. I think a lot of times people underestimate the power of the brain and the way that our brain thinks and things like that. And if we don't get that professional help and we don't train our brain to think of things in a positive way, we do unfortunately make irrational decisions like suicide. So today for your assignment at the end of this lesson, what you're going to do is you are going to answer this Canvas discussion. So if you go to Canvas, there's a little tab on the side. It's called discussions. It's not the assignment tab. It says discussions. There's a little prompt for you there, and you are going to respond to the prompt in at least 4 to 5 sentences. And then whenever you're done responding to the prompt, you're going to respond to at least one other person, kind of telling them what you think about their opinion. Here's a perfect example of somebody from class and what they wrote and then what they responded to say, yeah, I agree with what you have to say. Somebody said, my first impression on seeing this picture is somebody attempting to help. I believe this is a good thing. The message is not to make someone feel guilt. It's just to make them feel. The message is telling people that there will be people who care for you. You just have to care about finding them. I don't think it's a guilt trip, just an eye opener. And then another student responded to his prompt. Notice how these are long responses. They're not just brief. I agree. Okay. You're not going to get credit for that. This student said, to some extent, I can see where you're coming from, but I don't believe the eye opener has to be as harsh towards the person, because this could cause an emotional reaction, which is not exactly a good one, more than likely. Alas, I can definitely see your point. Okay. Just to clarify how you can get to this assignment, over here on the left, it says discussions. I have not posted it yet. I didn't want anyone working ahead. It says suicide discussion. Here is the prompt. It says this post, blah, 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 blah. Please respond with at least one paragraph, 4 to 5 sentences. Okay. Notice here it says, note your posts are visible to other students. So be sure whatever you're writing in response to this prompt, you are okay with other people in the class seeing. Okay. Once you finish that discussion, that's all you need to do for today's assignment. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. Thanks, guys.